Welcome to Living Lit, where conversations spark inspiration to live in truth. Journey together with us to explore what it means to live a liturgical life and walk in the truth of our faith. Let's instill a culture in our hearts, homes, families, and world, living a life cooperating with and walking alongside our Lord. I'm Robin Brueggemann. Let's be a light, share the light, shine the light, and live lit.
Okay, so you discovered that your child has been viewing pornography. What do? Do you freak out? Oh my gosh, what do I do? And start yelling at your child for stumbling into something that they shouldn't have? Or is there a better way to respond? I kind of think there's a better way to respond. And Father Cowles is back this episode to tell us how to respond. Now, seriously, guys, it can happen. Your kids can stumble upon pornography, whether they were seeking it out or it sought them out. And there is a wrong way probably, or a not so good way to respond. And then there's a better way to respond with compassion and taking a step back. So Father is back this week to talk to us about how to deal with if we've discovered one of our kiddos has stumbled upon porn, whether they are younger or maybe they're teens or whatever. So Father Cowles, welcome back as we talk about this sensitive, uncomfortable topic.
Yes, thank you very much, Robin. I'd say before we talk about the correct response, let's talk about the incorrect responses. Because you'll notice there's actually two kind of extremes. One of them seeks to minimize the overall problem, and the other one seeks to almost overreact to the problem. Mm-hmm. And both of them, I think, have a good kind of intention underneath them, but at the same time aren't the responses that our kids are probably going to need. Mm-hmm. So on the one side, you have the overreaction response, the screaming, the yelling, the saying, how terrible are you? How could you have done this? Why have you entered into this kind of stuff? Did you do this? Did somebody else do this? And sometimes in those moments, what happens is the shame becomes so profound and so real for those children. They're like, I can never go to mom or dad with this stuff ever again. Mm-hmm. Because all they're going to do is shame me and tell me that I'm a horrible person. And sometimes it actually begins a cycle of addiction. That shame drives them into them actually going back to the source of their problems and saying, well, I'm just going to go back to this and I'm just never going to share it with my parents. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be completely alone in this, because I don't know how to find freedom. They made it apparent that they aren't actually here for me to try and give me help. They just want me to stop. And it's like telling an addict to say, stop smoking, stop drinking, stop doing this sort of stuff. Sometimes it doesn't work that easily because we don't always know how much it's entrenched in them already, this stuff that they've been watching or what's been going on. Now, father response is, oh, everybody does it, it's okay. You know, oh, you give a little wink like, oh, I see what you're doing there. There are lots of fathers who over the years have seen this sort of thing happen. And many of those fathers themselves have their own pornography stash at different times. Mm-hmm. And they basically just want to say to their sons, it's okay, you're not a horrible person. But in the process of giving them that wink or saying it's okay, or all boys will be boys or men do it, what happens is they actually lead them to think, this is just fine. Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I now give you a free carte blanche to do whatever you want. And at that moment in time, sometimes it's even more dangerous. There have been such terrible damage done to marriages oftentimes when at times a wife so desirous of wanting to be accepting of her husband, or husband so desirous of wanting to be accepting of their wife, when they find this stuff out, say, oh, it's fine. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And that person is saying, no, I don't want this. I don't desire this. Mm-hmm. Now, they don't feel like they're let down by their spouse, but they oftentimes feel like it wasn't reacted to with the correct amount of seriousness at those times. So what is
Well, just going to remind people, if you missed last episode, we talked about pornography. We talked about how to talk to your kids about it. So if anybody missed that and you're jumping into me freaking out in the opening of the episode,
go back, pretending. Go back, please, go back.
You should listen to last episode first, because we lay the groundwork. But then in this episode, we're talking about what do we do? Oh my goodness, we found out that our child has stumbled into this. How do we address it? And the right and a better and a not so good way. addressing this. So I think the first thing we could do, so you talked about a couple ways not to address it. I think the first thing we should do is pray.
Yeah.
And we talked about that in our other episode about it's so important to pray and take a step back. Now, if I don't know if I should tell people this or not, that I can be a freaker outer. Spike is totally not. If you know my husband, you know he's totally
You can be a
calm.
freaker outer?
Yeah, I can.
You, Robin? You can over-exaggerate?
I can get upset.
Okay,
and,
that's good to know.
Yeah.
So in case you didn't know this, Robin is human. She's a real human being. Yeah.
But I can, let's just say my first response is not to go, take a step back, Robin. My first response is react. And so it is so good for me to hear, because you and I have talked behind the scenes, and I have all done some research into some of this, is to just take a step back before reacting. And so that's what we want to start with, right? Is to be like, okay, I discovered this about my child or whatever. Take a step back, pray, invite the Lord into it, and know that you have time to process. Mm-hmm. So here's where I think before I stumbled upon how a person would best respond and react in a situation like this was to, I think I would have felt like, oh my gosh, I have to address this second, or it's just going to keep getting worse. But to have I don't want to say permission to be like, it's okay. You do have a few minutes or a couple days or whatever to figure out how we're going to move forward.
Exactly. So taking the time to breathe, taking the time to pray and discern, and to discuss it as a family. Yeah. In the sense of you and your spouse, to take the time to look at this, or to talk with someone that you trust in the midst of those moments.
I love that you absolutely bring your spouse into that. Like, don't go at this alone.
Definitely.
This is.
But this is also an area where the two of you want to be unified, because if one of you tries to be on the soft side or the hard side, either way, what can happen is that lack of a unified front when you're talking to your kids can cause a lot of confusion. Absolutely. You want to make sure that as you speak to your kids, two things happen. One is they know that this is wrong, but they also know that you still love them in the midst of it being wrong. And that love is seeking to pull them out of the brokenness that they're dealing with at that moment in time, and to say that there's a different way that this can be done. To say that God's forgiveness is present. You can come back to confession. You can receive his love. You don't have to be stuck in this for the rest of your life. This isn't who you are. You are not the product of your sin. But at the same time, this is something serious that we have to be very careful about and to fight off in the future. So for a lot of those parents who are there, taking that step back, talking with each other, saying, how do we want to walk through this and deal with this is super important. And then to say, hey, could we meet up and talk with our son, or do we go to our room when he's there on the computer, or at another separate time? This is probably not a supper conversation that you have with all the rest of your kids while you're there. I mean, they might have done that in the 1980s sitcoms, but I would not go there at this moment in time. I'd take your time to do a separate conversation with both of you there, and just being really honest to say, this is something that we noticed or we discovered, that we saw. As we say this, we're not actually here to say that there's something wrong with you or horrible about you, but we want to be very honest with you that this is something that is very serious. And the reason it's serious is because of all the things we talked about in that first episode, because of the way it distorts our mind, the way we can get addicted to it, the way that it changes the way that we interact with other human beings. And oftentimes, after seeing it, our desire to enact and act out what it is that we saw. That's one of the other aspects of this we didn't talk about as much. But oftentimes, after seeing this, there's a deep desire of wanting to enact what it is that a person has seen. So it's saying, okay, this isn't reality. This isn't what really this looks like as it's meant to be. And we want to talk about this as openly as we possibly can. But first and foremost say, okay, why is this wrong? What is something that we can do in response to this? Using all of the tools that we tried our best to give you in the course of the first episode, we can bring those into play at that moment in time. But the goal is to do so with compassion and love. So for myself as a priest, I oftentimes encounter this, where a person comes to me so filled with shame, regret, frustration, and they bring to me the sins that they have just committed or that they've committed some time ago, and they think that they can never be forgiven, or that forever from that moment on they're a dirty, horrible person. Satan calls us by our sin. God calls us by our name. So we always have to remember, God is calling you out of your sin to who you are. So we have to do the exact same thing as parents. As parents, we call them out for who they are, remind them that this is a sinful behavior, but then say, this is not who you are. You don't need to be this person. You don't need to enter into these kinds of acts. But then to say, we're here to help you get the help that you need, to walk with you in the midst of this. And, there may be a part of you that says, well, but I think that this is okay because all my friends are doing it and so forth. Well, let's talk about that. Don't just shut them down as they enter into that conversation. Really talk about it and converse with them and to say, am I really allowing myself to engage? Now, obviously, you're holding the particular line of saying this is something that's bad. But I want you to say, well, why do you think it's good? Why do you think it's okay? They have to have the ability to actually share that kind of stuff before they really enter into this. And then from there, allowing there to be, whether it's protections that they receive or things that help them so that they don't enter into that addiction again. But even talking with your local pastor about some of this stuff can be very good. Now, some pastors can also have the freak out model. Oh, is that really happening? But most of them, after going, after hearing confessions for years and so forth, are simply going to say, this is what a lot of people deal with. As much as you'd like to think that your son or your daughter is completely unique and that no one else is like them and no one else falls into these sins, a great majority of the people do. And what you're going through is something that so many other parents go through. But know that you're not alone, first of all. Know that there's so many people who have left this world behind and have great freedom and great happiness, and that you're going to find support. You don't ever have to be alone in the midst of this.
I was just reminded of, so you recorded something for RPR, which is Real Presence Radio, strongly recommend, Catholic radio station, which we've linked in the last show, and I'll link it again. But I think one of the fears that I had is, and have, I guess, so I have a lot of fear, which is not good, around pornography, because I just don't want it to get to my kids or my family, but I'm not doing enough to try and prevent it. And so I'm with many of you in this boat where I need to do more. There are things that need to be implemented. But one of my fears or misconceptions that I have is knowing how pornography affects the brain, which we talked about in the last episode, which people can go back and listen to that. But I used to think, actually, until I heard what you said on something on RPR this morning when I was listening on the way in, was I used to think, oh my goodness, if the kids stumble upon that, like, oh my gosh, it's just going to affect them forever. And it's just going to be like, I would just feel so bad. And like, oh my gosh, like it would just be just devastating. Well, yes, it would be. But you had mentioned on that show how, and we talked about in the first episode of this segment of Living Lit, where this pathway is formed as someone is viewing pornography, right? And so it's like...
That rut that we mentioned before.
The rut, yes. And our friend Emily, so I went back in some of the archives of the bishop's bulletins that our diocese puts out, and I found one from, 4 or 5 years ago. And Emily, you and Father Kevin and Emily Leadham had talked a little bit in that article, and she compared it to like sledding, where you sled down a hill. This hill is... it's like maybe a blank hill, but then you keep sledding down this same spot. Well, pretty soon you have this rut. And like you talked about with the rut, it's harder to get out of, right? And so I had heard that and I thought, oh gosh, that's just there forever. But you did address on the RPR episode about how you can, or maybe it was Father Kevin that said you can retrain your brain. You can, like, is it rewiring or fix it?
Kind of rewiring.
So
the way the actual kind of phrasing that they talk about with neurosurgeons and others who study the brain intensively is they call it neuroplasticity.
Yes.
So the brain does have the incredible ability to work around itself, to change its pathways, to do all sorts of things as is necessary. And with that rut mentality, like I said, if you're stuck in a rut, it's hard to get out. But if you really jerk the wheel, you're going to get out of it. Using that same sledding analogy, years ago, I remember sledding when I lived in Minot down this big canyon area, and it took forever to get down there the first time. The next day it rained, and the water froze over that path that I made. Next day I was speeding down it as fast as possible, but I had to really push myself to get out of it. Otherwise I'd be totally crashing for the bottom of the canyon in those moments. In these moments, this is an easy thing that we can do. Or not easy thing, but it is something that is very much possible. So building up behaviors and changes in our identity and what we do in the moments when we are dealing with an addiction or with pornography is possible. Healing is possible. One of my favorite authors, spiritual authors, but also incredible psychiatrists is Bob Schuchts. And Bob Schuchts does incredible work in this, but he works a lot with people in healing those memories, those moments that they've seen, and allowing them to come out of that and to change what they've experienced or what they began to falsely believe as they saw those images about themselves and about sexuality itself. And to recognize, okay, these are lies that I don't have to believe, and I no longer have to be chained by these images from my past. Sometimes the Lord even gives us full healing from those images in our lives.
Yeah, so that is so encouraging to me as a parent to know that there is healing. Healing can be done in the person. I mean, this isn't just our children, it's anybody experiencing this, any addiction, honestly, right? But that there is help there. There are resources to help the situation.
Yeah. Now, these days, there's actually therapists that are completely and fully trained in what's known as kind of helping with sexuality. And it's for both sides. Now, what some of these therapists are really, really good at is aiding a person who deals with addiction to overcome that addiction. And especially those who are Christians, therapists who have entered into that field and can work with people are super, super helpful. But those same people also at times understand what's known as betrayal trauma. So say you have a spouse who discovers that their husband or their wife has been viewing this stuff and they feel betrayed. Those same therapists are oftentimes equipped with how to aid them to overcome that betrayal and allow them not only to forgive, but to love again in those relationships. But speaking more so about youth, for us as parents, we can feel like total failures. And that's something to recognize, like if you're working with your kids, you are not a failure. There's nothing wrong with you because you've done this. Now, there could have been precautions you've taken, but you're now at a place where you're working with your kids and you're doing your best with them. So often in your heart, you can say, I must be a horrible or terrible parent. How could I have possibly allowed this to happen? Evil one jumps on that bandwagon as quickly as he possibly can because he wants to tear you down. But it's to say, no, I love my kids. I'm willing to make the hard decisions now that I know that I need to make. And I'm going to follow through on this kind of stuff. And I'm going to be there for my kids. Also, if I've had one of those two reactions that we talked about at the very beginning, I'm going to come back to this. And I'm going to say, I underreacted before. This is something that is serious. And we need to talk about this. Or on the overreaction side, I needed to take a chill pill. I'm sorry about that. I overdid in that area. But I want to come back. In humility, I want to apologize to you for the way I reacted. This is something that's serious. But the way that I reacted in that moment was probably not the best for you. And I'm sorry for that. Because in that moment, you have the ability to even heal what you've possibly caused at that time by asking for forgiveness or by entering into that.
Yeah. So as we're sitting here, as you're talking about that, a thought that just came to me is, how would you address, I want to know if my kid has been exposed to pornography. How would you recommend even, do you just say, hey, have you seen that? How would you address that? So let's just say,
the kind of out of the blue, you're eating potato chips and you're, watching something and you're like, hey, have you ever looked at pornography before? Probably you want to preface it a little bit more than that before you come to that point in time.
Yeah.
But I think in some of these conversations in which you're working with you're looking at the phone or you're doing your best to build up protections or you're talking to your kids about some of these issues, as is mentioned, as you're talking about these issues, to say that we condemn the sin, not the sinner. We do our best to love the person, but to say that this is something that's not good for you. To say if you have experienced this, if you have done this, know that you're still loved and so forth. But is this something that you've experienced? Because I want to do my best to walk with you. So that preface of saying, okay, first and foremost, that I love you. That God loves you in the midst of this moment. That His love and my love for you is not conditional on you being a perfect child. That's a big key. But then, as you do so, of saying, but I do want to ask this, not to cause more shame, not to cause more difficulty, but so that we can bring it into the light and so you can receive help. Oftentimes for myself as a confessor, I'm trying to do my best to walk people step by step through making a good confession. And I recognize that a lot of people have entered into this stuff. Now, usually they're being their best to be completely and totally honest within the confessional. But the way I'll approach oftentimes certain sins is, have you seen things that you think would be inappropriate online at different occasions? Has there been times that you've done inappropriate things with yourself because of those sorts of acts or those sorts of things that you've seen? Before I charge into dealing with the issue, oftentimes I stop and will say, thank you so much for your courage and your confidence in sharing this with me, because I know that was probably really hard. And I don't want to betray that confidence that you've just given me or that courage that you've just shown the Lord. But I do want us to work on this so that you can get better and that you can overcome this. So doing it in non-obtrusive ways can be very helpful. But I'd also say, if you just have this strange curiosity bug in the back of your mind, kill it. Don't just ask the question because, I just want to know if they've been there. And don't spend your entire time necessarily living in pure suspicion of this kind of stuff, looking for it and seeing if your kids have looked at it. Instead, just share with them and talk with them. It's best to be upfront and direct on the front end than to try and approach things on the back end after something has already happened.
So would you be open to right now, just giving, setting up a little script thing for, let's just say I'm kid. And we talked about this in our first episode. It's not just boys. This is girls also.
Correct.
And also I want to just remind people too, watching or listening, that we want no one to leave listening or watching these episodes feeling shamed at all. Please, no. We're trying to just have conversation about this to be helpful to others and give tools and just kind of bring all of this to light so we can, maybe help prevent something. But if someone is already walking in this, we also just want to provide encouragement for you or someone you know. So just please know everything we're talking about here is meant in such a loving, charitable way to you listeners and viewers as well. So are you open to, let's just say then, because I think a lot of parents will say you've given so many great tips on how you would address this. Let's just say I'm kid, you're my dad, and you just discovered, would you be willing to just kind of enter into a little bit of a dialogue of you busting me? You know what I mean?
Do you think you can play the busted part?
Well, no, not necessarily. No, but I'll silently, I'll be the kid that's just
yeah.
Because I'm going to assume that there are a lot of kids that are just going to just sit there because they're going to feel ashamed and because there's going to be a lot of kids that they knew better.
Most definitely.
And again, like we talked in the other episode, they didn't necessarily seek it out. It could have sought them out. I'll be honest, one of my kiddos, the first time they were exposed to it was on the school bus. They didn't choose it. Someone put it in front of their face. And I have boys who have played football. It's in the locker room. So it doesn't they don't always seek it out. And I think that's the other thing we need to remember. If our children have seen it and have potentially developed a problem, it's not necessarily that they sought that out.
Correct.
And
exactly.
So, so I'm going to assume that a lot of kids on the receiving end of their parents finding out or asking, and then the kid coming clean saying, yes, I have been, or I do, will just sit silently. So I'll just be that kid that I'm like, oh my goodness, I've actually, and maybe they want to be found, because I'm assuming they may want
there may
some help
maybe some who do want to receive some kind of punishment because they know of what they've received. But a lot of the time what they're seeking especially is acceptance and love at the same moment in time. So we can definitely go over that.
Yeah, and because I do want to point out too that I have read, a lot of the kids that get, that find themselves in it, will say they were lonely and, whatever that may look like. So anyway, so I'll be the silent kid.
Okay.
And you can be the very gentle, loving dad.
We'll do our best in the midst of this. We'll do our best in the midst. Okay. Sounds good. So let's just say, for instance, a day or two before this has actually taken place, I have actually found out that there's been something that you have looked at. I was either looking online, a page wasn't shut, I was noticing on television, I was looking at YouTube, and there were some very racy things that were on there. And I checked with my wife and my other kids to say, hey, were any of you looking at this? And found out that it wasn't you, and you were the only one who was there who was watching this. And there's definitely a first part of confrontation of saying, okay, So we'll just call you Billy. Hi, Billy. How are you doing today?
Doing okay, Dad.
Hey.
Something up?
Well, something is possibly up. Billy, I was checking the television the other day, and I noticed that there were some YouTube videos on there that were not the most appropriate. Were you the one who was watching those?
Maybe.
Okay.
What did you see?
Well, I saw some particular actresses and some other, musicians who were on there who were doing music videos and things like that, which were probably not the best. Have you seen stuff like this before?
Yeah, a couple times.
Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, before we go any deeper on this, I want to say thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that. And I know it's probably not easy to say that stuff. And with these things that you've seen, it probably brought a whole series of emotions and ideas. But I want you to know, even though it might make you feel terrible or horrible or a lot of conflicting emotions, I want you to know that I care for you. I love you. The whole reason that I'm having this conversation isn't because I just wanted to randomly pick on you and decide that we're going to talk about a really weird, awkward issue. And I know you're probably feeling awkward, right? Mm-hmm. Awkward? Yeah, okay. I am too. This isn't the most enjoyable kind of subject, but at the same moment, it's something very important for us to talk about. So you've looked at some of this stuff that's there. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because my responsibility for you as your father is to care for you, to protect you, to love you, and also for your salvation, to help get you to heaven. So I want to share this with you, first of all, for that. Now, the stuff that you saw can be very, very dangerous. And you might say, well, why is it dangerous? Well, because it begins to change the way that you see and that you view others in a particular way. And also, it can become very addicting. Like, do you have any friends who watch some of this stuff? Yeah. And I know probably a lot of them don't know how to stop what they're doing. And they probably say that it's normal and that everybody else goes through this kind of stuff. But as I've probably talked with you about before, is it normal to go up to a woman or a husband and wife's window and look and see what they're doing in their bedroom? Obviously not. So not something that's so good. So our goal here, my goal with you is just to say, has this been something that you've talked about in confession with Father? Has it been something you've talked about yet? Okay, good. Now, if you haven't, I want to encourage you because in confession, first of all, you're going to find no judgment and love from our priest. Our priest does everything they can to try and help people out in these areas. He's probably giving you some basic advice, but I just want to share with you, like from now on, we need to be very careful about this. Now, we have never necessarily installed software on your phone, but I really think it would be helpful. I actually have it on my phone already, simply for my protection and your guys' protection if anything would happen, because I want to model this for you. I don't simply want to just tell you you have to have it if I don't have it already. So I'm going to add you to our family's subscription for that. And is it okay if I check your phone from time to time? No? Okay. Well, it's something that we're going to have to work on because it's something that's going to be very important. Now, I'm not going to just do it randomly, but there's going to be times that I think it's important that we talk about this. How are you feeling about all this?
I don't know. I don't really want you on my phone.
I totally get that. Totally get that. But as far as phones go, you know who's paying the bill on a regular basis, and you also know who gave you the phone in the first place. Now, I have to be honest, I'm still learning some of this stuff. I possibly, should have gone through this stuff with you before, but I'm coming to recognize as a parent, there's a lot of things out there that I'm still learning about. But I want to make sure that your phone is something that's good for you to communicate with your friends and see cool videos and so forth, but not be something that's going to be a source of temptation in your life. So hopefully we can trust each other in those moments, that we can work on this together. Now, I've also talked a little bit with your mom about this, and I know that's a cringeworthy statement, but she has entrusted this to me to work with you about, just because I know that you'd be very uncomfortable talking with your mom about many of these issues. So that's why we're talking about it this way, just between us. Now, I'm going to tell her about what we talked about because I don't ever guard anything from your mom. We always talk about these issues, but we're decided that we're going to do everything that we can to help. Have you noticed that this has been something that's really hard in your life to stop? Or, okay, then if you want to, we can meet with others and we can talk about it there. But I want this to be an environment where you're not afraid to share some of these issues. And if you're scared or worried, we can talk about them, as we've talked about so many other things in your past. Do you have any concerns?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Am I grounded?
For a little bit. Not for long, but for a little bit. But here's the big thing. Like, did you know that this was not stuff that you should have been looking at? Okay.
Yeah.
And why did you do it? Was it something that you discovered from your friends that you looked at or things like that? Okay. Now, no, that's not your fault. What happened with them isn't your fault. You discovered and stumbled upon this stuff. But then afterwards, you took the choice to continue to view. And this is why we have to stop this now and recognize that this is for the protection of your heart. So that day, when whatever vocation God calls you to, whether it's for marriage or the priesthood, you can give your heart completely to your spouse at that moment in time.
That makes sense.
Okay. This isn't exactly as it probably would be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Like, we're just trying to give you an idea, because I think that's, a lot of people just need that idea. So thank you, Father, for playing theater here in the studio.
Tried our best.
But no, I think that will help. And definitely, as a parent, you need, first, please pray. Even if you're not a prayer, just invite the Lord into this, invite the Holy Spirit into the conversation you're going to have. And, listen to, kind of the example that Father gave on how you could have that conversation with your child, but make it your own, because it needs to be coming from you. And as hard as that is for us, sometimes we just want a script as a parent to be able to just read it to them or just push play. Here, watch this episode of Living Lit and listen to what Father's saying. No, it needs to be coming from you as a parent. And God is going to provide those words. He is. I mean, definitely educate yourself on, pornography, educate, do some listening to some podcast or whatever, get some knowledge. But I think, if we're going to speak from the heart, that's really what it matters. I mean, like, you've told me so many times when we've talked on this, is the kids just need to know they're loved, that we love them. And, of course, disappointment's going to come through, I'm sure, with that, but that we just want them to know we love you. We want what's best for you. We want to help you through this. To have that compassion for anybody that is finding themselves in any sort of an addictive situation, but that we love the children, we want what's best for them. So did you have something else to add to that?
No, I was just going to say, every parent is going to have their own style and their own realities that you talk about with your kids. Every single parent. Some would probably prefer that I had been more firm. Some would prefer that I've actually been much more sensitive and quiet. With each one of us, it's going to be a different kind of response in those moments. But you know your kids.
Exactly.
This is just a random scenario. If you know your kids and you know where they're coming from, you know how to approach this.
Right.
We always say that the parents are the best educators of their own kids. And that's one of the things that's been instilled time and time again in Lit Living. So recognize you know your children. Do not be afraid to talk with them about these issues. And to recognize, to notice cues, to notice how uncomfortable they are, and to notice what kind of things that you can say. Some might be focused very much on the aspect that this is a sin, that this is mortal sin. And many of your kids might already know this completely well and what that does to them. Others may know that it's a sin, and the biggest thing that they need right now is to know that they're loved and compassionate because they think that they're a horrible, terrible person. You discovered something, they're breaking down and crying, they're in a horrible, terrible state. It just depends. Notice that as you talk with your kids about these particular issues, each of them is going to have a different response. But you know your kids, hopefully. And as you know them, be prepared to react to what's happening in their life and to play with what you know as best as possible.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So we're going to leave you with some more, just like a couple resources in case you missed some of them that Father shared on our first episode or any that he has thought of now. One of the things, so we mentioned Covenant Eyes in the last episode, and that is one that Father really recommends too. And I printed off this book. It's called Confident, Helping Parents Navigate Online Exposure. And what's really neat is Covenant Eyes, they have just an amazing amount of resources that you can read blogs, listen to things. They have the software protection you can put on your phones, on your computers, but they have this book and it's actually a Catholic version, and then they have a non-Catholic version too, which is just amazing. And it addresses, the how do I talk to my kids, but I have discovered that my children has already discovered pornography. How do I talk to them? So there are some tips in this book, which is a free downloadable that you can get. And then Father, you have some resources that you would like to share. I do love that you mentioned you can talk to your priest.
Yeah.
Thank you
most
for,
definitely.
And that people don't need to be afraid. I mean, you as priests, I don't speak for you, but like you want your people to come to you. You want to help them. You want to assist them. You want to see their family live in love and thrive in holiness. And so please, by all means, contact your priest and don't be afraid or ashamed to. You won't be the first. and you won't be the last. So please know the priests are always there for you. So what else would you like to, in closing, share for resources or anything you want to add?
For teenagers, whether boys or girls, who have been exposed to some of this stuff, as we mentioned before, there's a program called Fortify. Like I said, it's non-Catholic, but it's, I believe, a 16 to 20-week program that's focused especially on guiding them through how to overcome if they have looked at porn or if they have entered into an addiction. What it's really focused on, though, especially is building up new practices and virtues in the course of their life to try and take the place of these bad habits that have grown in their hearts. Another thing that was mentioned before is Strive 21, a program that was started by Matt Fradd. Matt is an incredible and very gifted speaker, but he's been talking about this stuff for the course of the last decade or two, and really going around the United States trying to aid people to understand how to overcome addictions and problems that they've dealt with in the course of their lives. However, one resource that I forgot to mention last time was a book that was written by Jason and Kristalina Everett, who have the Chastity Project. They have their own website on chastity. But the book, I believe, is just called Raising Pure Teens, or Raising Chaste Teens. And it goes through all kinds of cool questions on these particular issues. How do I aid my children with modesty? How do I talk with them about some of these issues? What do I look at when I'm dealing with these subjects? And how best do I come close and really talk to my kids about these very sensitive topics in the course of their life. For those who are adults and dealing with these particular issues, if you notice this with adult men or women, there are different groups like the Chastity Support Group that we have in our diocese, and you can actually find more resources about that through NPR or even just contacting me or Father Kevin Odell in our diocese about that. There's also groups known as things like Sexaholics Anonymous, which is really focused on trying to help people who have entered into a deep addiction as oftentimes adults. 18 and above is usually the necessity for these particular groups. But they're focused on a 12-step model of how to overcome and how to surrender these things to God, but then how to receive actual aid to overcome these problems in their lives. And there's a lot more stuff out there. One very new resource within the last couple of years, Father Jim Mason, a priest of our diocese, who's done great work with seminarians, especially during his time down at Kendrick Glennon in St. Louis. He worked with someone on their staff to develop what they called the Augustine Way. The Augustine Way. And the Augustine Way, when you look and learn about it, is a program aiding men to integrate their sexuality and women to integrate their sexuality, but also how to overcome addiction and problems in the course of their lives. Has a full manual and a trainer's facilitator guide that I'm going to start probably even using myself for others as we kind of work our way through this, because it's focused on not only just becoming sober from problems, but how to put virtues in their place.
Wow, I love
and how to live that out. So,
wow, I had no idea that he did that. Our diocese is amazing.
Well, this was the psychiatrist who, as Father Mason has jokingly said, the very first book that was dedicated to me was one about how to overcome porn. I feel so honored, but at the same time, I feel a little surprised by that. Yeah. But at the same time, it's a huge gift because he supported this therapist who was working at the seminary and really developing this so that the guys could really find true freedom.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, that is something we really have in our favor is we have so many resources. So really encourage people to become aware because this pornography is not going anywhere. It is not. It's just getting bigger. And so we need to stay aware and just do what we can to keep our kids safe. So thank you, Father.
Very glad to.
I'm just so grateful for all the work you do in our diocese and all the people that you assist and walk along in the journey of pornography. Just so thankful for your openness to talk about it. And we hope, friends, that this has just helped you to just get to know a little bit, like just maybe feel more comfortable, if that's a possible thing with, just addressing this topic. And ultimately, we just want to keep our families safe. We want to do what we can to raise holy, healthy, happy children and families so we can just live in truth is what it's all about. So thanks again, Father. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us today. Remember to like, subscribe, and share Living Lit, and reach out with topics you'd like tackled at livinglit@sfcatholic.org. And be the light, shine the light, share the light, and live lit.